learn with us as we explore securing research grants in bilingual education. The webinar today that we're all participating in is hosted by the Bilingual Education Research Special Interest Group at AERA, and we will be recording this webinar for our SIG. So if you have to exit out at any time, or if you know folks who were unable to attend, this will be a recorded session that we can cycle back to. So today in our webinar, it's hosted by the Mentoring Working Group of the Bilingual Education Research SIG, and my name's Kristen. I'm the chair of this working group, and my colleagues are Mandy Stewart from Texas Women's University, who's also going to be serving as one of our panelists today, and Claudia Rodriguez Mojica from Santa Clara University, who organized our Zoom space. Thank you so much, Claudia, for doing that, and is running all that's happening behind the scenes that you might not see to make this webinar possible. And Sandra Quiñones from Duquesne University will be serving as our moderator today, so asking questions and facilitating the conversation that's happening. And then we have been led and mentored, thank you so much, Veronica Valdez from the University of Utah, who's our current SIG leader and chair. So today we are all so lucky to have amazing panelists with us. I cannot express how grateful we are for the generosity of your time, especially during this time of year that's so full, to donate your time to us, to share your wisdom and insight. We are all humbled and grateful for your willingness to participate in this webinar. So our guest panelists today are Dr. Belinda Bustos Flores, a professor and associate dean at the University of Texas, San Antonio, and Dr. Socorro Herrera, a professor at Kansas State University, Dr. Gisela Ernst-Lavet, a professor at Washington State University, and Dr. Mandy Stewart, co-serving today, and she's an associate professor at Texas Women's University. And we're looking so forward to all we're going to be learning from you today, and thank you for making the time to be here and share with us. Just kind of an outline of our purpose for this webinar and what you can be expecting as folks who are listening in. We are going to be discussing bilingual research funding opportunities and hear the recommendations from these expert scholars who so generously agreed to share with us about their experiences, successes, and challenges with grants. We'll be hopefully providing you the opportunity to ask additional questions. Thank you for those of you who post questions in your registration. So if we have time to get to those questions at the end, or if they're not addressed during the conversation, we will get to those, as well as ones you might be posting in the Q&A here in this webinar. And then we are also hoping to provide you opportunity regarding the research process and how we navigate that as a group to make the scholarship as rich as it can be in our field. So the format of the session is going to be an informal question and answer format. Our panelists are invited to contribute to the questions they're most drawn to. There's not an expectation that each panelist will answer every question. We'll have a lead panelist taking each question with the exception of the first one. Everyone will address that one so we can know who they are and a little bit about the work if you're not familiar. And then if you're listening with your questions, please type those in as they come up. And then if they aren't addressed throughout the webinar, we will do our best to get to them. If we don't get to them, though, we will try to cycle back to them in our winter webinar. So from here, I'll pass the presentation to Sandra and our panelists.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Kristen. Can you hear me? Okay, excellent. So our first question for our panelists is to tell us a little bit about yourself as a bilingual education scholar who has successfully secured research grant. And in this brief introduction, you can perhaps give an overview of the types of grants that you're familiar with, because I know some of you have different expertise on either internal grants, external, foundation, national, and professional development grants, and the different types of grants available. So we can start with that.
Well, I'll start since no one out there starting. This is Socorro
Yes.
Herrera. I'm at Kansas State University, and I've been here for 24 years. Came to the Midwest from New Mexico, and I just stayed here. Most of my work from the second year that I started as an assistant professor, because my passion has always been to work with migrant seasonal farm workers, as well as English language learners and bilingual education. I immediately started seeking and networking to learn from others about proposal writing and the contributions it could make to the field. I had a dean who said to me, find your passion, and that's what you research and write about, and you will be very successful. And so to date, we've had lots and lots of projects at the Center for Intercultural and Multilingual Advocacy. The beautiful thing about writing a proposal and getting it funded is that you also begin to work with colleagues and with educators across the state and across the country. I've been very successful with College Assistant Migrant Program. I've had both a high school equivalency program and a camp grant, and then the Office of English Language Acquisition. So to date, 22 years later, we're at 50 million.
Wow.
Working with families, students, and with preparing teachers of color for the field. So,
thank you so much.
I'll go ahead and go next.
Mm-hmm.
I'm Belinda Bustos Flores, and I'm Professor of Bicultural Bilingual Studies and Associate Dean, long title. But I've been working in the field as a bilingual teacher and bilingual counselor, and then, of course, in the field of higher ed as a professor. And my research has to deal with the preparation of bilingual teachers. And my grants have always linked up back to my research. And so the types of grants that I have gotten are U.S. Department of Ed, NSF, some internal grants, and some foundation grants as well. And so lessons learned, and later I want to talk about it, but from the onset is having this big vision of where you want to do with the grant. Is a one-shot deal. In my case, my first grant was to establish the Academy for Teacher Excellence with a focus on ensuring that we were addressing the needs of our bilingual student population and in the recruitment, preparation, and retention of bilingual teachers. And over time, make sure that the focus was stayed on that as well.
Excellent, thank you.
I forgot to say the amount of money. So I'm not as much as Socorro. We're 15 years old. So we have, I think, 27 to $30 million that we've gotten.
Both remarkable amounts, for sure. We have another panelist. Mm-hmm.
Okay, my name is Gisela Ernst Slavitt, and I'm at Washington State University and on the Vancouver campus. And like my colleagues, I've been working with in the field of bilingual and ELL education, and have been first at many levels, like my colleagues on this panel. In terms of grants, I think the basis of my grants have been the collaboration and partnership work. I have always tried to not answer necessarily my questions, but the questions of the people I'm working with. Mm. And that has been helpful in securing grants at the state level and national levels. Internal grants have been very helpful for me in terms of my own research, because sometimes some of the grants I've obtained are for professional development, and the research component might not be as strong. Yet there's so many lessons you can gain from a professional development program. So research can be part of those projects, and should be nowadays, actually, should be part of the grants. My advice for any of you interested in grants, which I'm assuming is most of you, is partner, start collaborations earlier, let the questions emerge from the constituencies that you're working with, and then from then move on.
Excellent. Mandy?
Hi everyone, I'm Mandy Stewart, and I am by far the least experienced person on this panel, but hopefully you will take away that you can start early on in your academic career to look for grants and hopefully reach the status that our other panelists have already reached. I applied for a lot of internal funding during my first few years in academia, and right now I'm the PI for the first time for a grant, the National Professional Development Program with the Office of English Language Acquisition, and I'm the co-PI on another one where I can learn from a colleague. And I also have a small grant from the National Council for Teachers of English. Even though I focus on bilingualism, you can sometimes get those smaller grants to support your work as well.
Excellent. Thank you to all of our panelists for your responses for question 1. We're going to move on to question 2 now. So in terms of grant type and fit, can you share an example of a grant that you have sought and secured and how you chose which grant was the best fit for your research project and in terms of its aims and its goals?
I think I volunteer for that one. So again, the grants that I've gotten have been from the U.S. Department of Ed. And so I look carefully at what the specific criteria that they have. And also sometimes they identify areas where you can get extra points. And so I look at those areas and I think, how does this intersect with what we're needing to do? A few years back, there was grants for transition to teaching that would allow you to bring in candidates into your program and get a certification. And so that at that point, there was a lot of alt-cert programs, and we decided we would apply for it because we wanted to make sure that we prepared secondary folks to meet the needs of bilingual populations. So, you know, it's still with the same idea of recruiting, preparing, and retaining teachers, but in this case, specifically for content area teachers for bilingual teacher candidates. So, bilingual bilingual students. And so we worked on the grant, but in doing that, and I think that's how we met Socorro, we brought in people like Socorro Herrera to help us with the ESL components. And that's another key thing as you're writing a grant, is looking at the bigger picture. What is it that you want to accomplish? Really identify what your end game is at line. I've always used the theory of change. And if you're not familiar with that, you can go into the U.S. Department of Ed and look up theory of change. What you do is identify what are the strengths that you have, what are some areas of need, and what are some things that you need to build on, but also what are your immediate goals and your long-term goals. And that helps you plan your grant and thinking about the types of infrastructure that you will need. So when you're planning a grant and securing a grant, you have to see if there's an alignment with what you want to do. And in the case, somebody said, well, what you want to do with a community or a school district, and then how it best fits your research project. Because something that happens with a lot of junior faculty, they go for the grants, but then there's no publication. And I've always said, it turns out to be a nice story. We had this grant and we did XYZ, but there's no story told behind it. So you also have to build those research questions so that becomes part of your goal, even if it's not a research grant.
Thank you so much. That's very important. Would other panelists like to add or respond to this question?
I can add. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Socorro.
No, Gisela, go ahead. I was just, that wait time. So go ahead.
So one of the grants, I had just moved to Vancouver, Washington, not BC. I had just moved to Vancouver from the main campus in Pullman, and I was working with a school district, and I kind of just follow what the school district wanted to do. And there were so many players in this, that someone wanted to do this, someone wanted to do that. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do because I was new in the area. So after going around and around and around, then everyone, let me backpedal here. So every meeting we had, we were like 12 people, and every time it was different 12 people. And they would come with their ideas. This is how we're going to do it. Oh, no, we need this. And then next week we would meet and it was another person. And then they would say, well, let's hire a grant writer. But we didn't have the clear idea. So then I decided, I said, I was junior faculty, and I said, well, I think if 3 of us or 4 of us get together and craft kind of like a theory of change, if it's just very slim, just main goals, how are we going to get there, steps, and then let's hear feedback. And so even though those were not my project or my goals, we managed to capture what the group wanted, streamline it, and then made it into a proposal that was funded. It took a lot of effort and a lot of listening. But sometimes you're in that position and you can run with it. Some people might not do that and say, no, this is not exactly how I envisioned this, and backed up. But I went with it, and I was lucky, and we got it was a paraprofessional, a career ladder program, and it was very successful. And I'm glad I did persevere.
And Gisela, just piggybacking off that, that's absolutely correct. You know, it's identifying and listening for the need in order to partnership. And it's from that need that then you derive the intersection of your research agenda and your passion, and bringing that to be then create into a framework that's theoretically grounded for writing that proposal. And so it's that, you know, Belinda talked about the intersection of our research interest, and coupled with then, or tied to the need within the district, and creating those partnerships, then it becomes a very synergistic approach to the work that we do that is mutually beneficial for the districts that we work with, the schools that we work with, as well as our own research agenda. And so being very clear from the onset, and not just going after proposals just because there's money out there.
You have to be strategic about, you know, once you get a grant, and say, all right, how does this other grant help me support or leverage what I'm doing? But perhaps when you thought of the first grant, you may have forgotten a component, and this other grant will help you build on the component that perhaps you have initiated here. So also looking at the intersectionality as you go for multiple grants, because what you don't want to do is get one grant and then you have certain goals here, and then you have another grant and has different goals, and then a third grant, and then by that time you're out of steam and out of energy and out of resources, and it doesn't help you to propel your research or help propel whatever you want to enact in terms of change.
Yeah, Belinda, that's an excellent point, and I think it brings us to question 3, right. Where we're going to talk about, you know, can you tell us about some grants that you've been awarded and some of the salient successes and challenges in terms of negotiating these grants? And you mentioned having multiple grants, right, and being strategic. But yeah, I wanted to pose this question next.
And I volunteer to answer part of this question. I want to kind of mention one important aspect, and it's about collaboration. All my grants, I have collaborated intensely. I have partnered, in this case, with the districts or the state office or different players. And even though it's harder and conversations become sometimes long-winded and everyone has an opinion and a want, and that's the best way to really understand everyone's goals and wants, and then try to make it work for your main players. The second aspect that I want to do, and this is, I'm going to speak particularly of the grants from the U.S. Department of Education, the Office of English Language Acquisition, OELA. One important thing that I've always done is work with my evaluator from the beginning. My evaluator is a key player in the writing, the developing, the planning of this grant. Some of us attend some meetings in November and hear stories about other folks who have been awarded grants, and there is this disconnect in terms of the evaluation portion and the goals. And like the PI knows all about this part, and then the evaluator or team of evaluators have to figure out how to produce what the PI has proposed. So that is a really problematic situation, and it shouldn't happen. You should work with your evaluator from the get-go and see how is it that you're going to be able to demonstrate progress in your project. One other aspect that I want to mention is early on in some grants, I was PI by myself, and I was able to kind of oversee everyone else doing things. I don't know about my colleagues here who have so many more, much more grants, but I, at this point, and due to the requirements of the funding agencies, I feel like I need a team to work with, because there are so many components in terms of the research, evaluation. It's a much more rigorous landscape than it used to be when I started working on grants. And so starting with a team of co-PIs, folks who are going to work with you, who are going to be part of the decision makers, making process is going to be very important. And let me just mention, for example, we just applied to a funding agency, an education funding agency, and the research components are very, very, how can I say it, strict in different aspects, because we have a quasi-experimental model, then we have a qualitative model, and then we have 4 different sites. And so you need folks who are gonna be able to be responsible for those sites. So anyway, so think about team as team in terms of writing and also partnershiping.
I'm gonna add as well, you know, when you think about partnering, don't just think about partnering with people within your, you know, college. Think about partnering with others outside your college as well. So, you know, you're trying to build in something for science education. You want to make sure there's an intersectionality with bilingual ed. That means reaching out to the right folks so that that way they can be part of your team, and it becomes very cross-disciplinary, so that the different expertise come in. And like Gisela said, you know, making sure you're building the team, but also the infrastructure. A mistake that, again, sometimes people make, they think, oh, well, we don't want to build in the evaluator, or we don't want to build in a support, some kind of administrative support, and then they end up doing it all. And so that takes away your time from what you should be focusing on looking at your research questions and collecting the right types of data. So, you know, you may have to give up a little bit of funding, but at the end of the day, you're going to accomplish your research goals. NSF is one of those goals that do not allow, let's say, administrative assistant or whatever support. But you can think about building in GAs or GRAs into your grant, or supporting doctoral students so that you can accomplish your work.
Yeah, and I think that's a caution that early on when we're writing proposals, we get very excited about the work that could take place if it were funded, and we oftentimes forget that we really need to be cautious with the budget. And
right.
It's like you say, if you can't have an administrative assistant, and like Gisela was saying, you have this research and evaluation where you're having to gather a lot of data, and you haven't thought of an RA or a GTA or some support, you find yourself then overwhelmed. And I'm going to say that that's a challenge that I had very early on. I didn't recognize that if I promised a whole lot, then I was going to have to carry it out. And if I hadn't clearly thought out the budget, it was going to be too late, because my college wasn't going to fill in anything. I was on my own. And so, so that challenge very early on for me is having had thought out very clearly that budget and how it aligned what I was promising to do. And I loved the whole idea of a team. It's so once you get that first one and you begin to build that team, I wouldn't be able to do any of this without the team at the center, and then seeking out those faculty members who are very supportive of the work that I do also.
Excellent. As the panelists are speaking, if I might add, it's like culturally responsive approaches even to securing grant writing, right? And so if we think about, how we approach this work and how it aligns to our values, or our, interdisciplinary collaborative nature. A side note, Mandy, or do you want to address this question, or do you want to move on, or should we move on? Okay, let's move on to question 4. Can you share some lessons learned as the principal investigator or the co-PI, co-principal investigator, in relation to one of your grants?
So right now I feel like I'm learning everything that the researchers before me have noted. And one of the main lessons that I'm currently learning right now is just the crucial nature of the partnerships that we have when we conduct our research with these grants. And the grants that I work with, it's all our local school districts, the public schools in our areas. So regularly cultivating that relationship, being present there, going to volunteer and serve in the classroom and do the hard work and meet their needs the best we can, even if it's not necessarily the #1 priority for us, to be very responsive to the teachers and the administrators' needs, because I think that is an important lesson that can help you continue your research, is to have that really strong relationship with them. And I've also learned that it takes time before you actually want to apply for that grant to cultivate and develop the relationship. So it's probably best not to show up and say, oh, there's this grant, it would be great to do this, but to already be a presence there and someone that they know and that they hopefully can trust.
Other panelists?
I would like to add something, and it has to do with change. The grants I've had are kind of responding to the need, to very specific needs in the K-12, in the districts, in the school districts. And so they can bring quite a bit of change, but change brings also growing pains, correct? And so one thing that I found is, if I can get a little bit of attention from the media with the projects, it helps educate others of what we are doing. There's still a lot of people who think, oh, so you're preparing bilingual teachers so they can teach all our kids a second language, and German and French, and so you have to educate not just the people you work with, and not just the people at the middle level at the district that you're working very close with, but those at the upper levels. It happens that in one of my projects, there was a change of superintendents, and what one superintendent agreed, the other superintendent wasn't aware of. And so all of a sudden, all our plans, and we have it in writing, but ultimately the print wasn't that clear, then the new superintendent was like, well, no, I don't think this is what we're gonna do. And it was helpful that we had several newspaper articles talking about how wonderful this project was. And so then the district then realized, yes, these are great goals, these are fabulous, we will do as we said. But it helped to have that sort of everyone informed about a project like this. So use your university systems to, to bring some spotlight to your projects. All of our projects are unique and are fostering change, and most of them respond to the needs of every institution serving for social justice, equity, etc.
I would also just add that as you're preparing for all of this, especially if you're just beginning, to really look out for existing examples of awarded grant narratives that might be out there either on the web, and study them. Different funding agencies, you write differently for each one, and so exploring the type of language that you're writing. the Office of English Language Acquisition over time has become more theoretically bound than it was in the past. Very early on, you were writing to a reader that wanted just, lots of, I mean, in both instances you wanted clarity, but it was the reader had to be in simple, language. I don't know if you would all agree to that. Now it's the landscape has changed, as you were sharing earlier. So maintain that positive relationship with that federal program officer, because no question is too dumb. They are really your supporters and are there to just pick up the phone in all of our different projects when we were lost into exactly what they were asking, because sometimes it's a little bit muddied when you're doing that evaluation. We could pick up the phone and talk and say, we just don't understand what it is that you're asking for, and we would be guided through what it is that we needed to do. And so I think also when you're working on federal projects is to understand that when the team comes together, that no job is beneath anyone, especially when you're pulling together the proposals. You're going to run to FedEx. You're going to, it's like you only had that short time to put it all together and create those partnerships and everything. So find those people who share your same vision, your same mission, your same values, and collaborate with those individuals so that the ownership becomes everyone's on the team.
If I can add to that, it's really important if you're a junior scholar, and I think it goes into number 5, but as a junior scholar, ask someone to mentor, or can I be the co-PI, or can I be a research associate? And I think that's one of the lessons learned is as well, if you want people to invest, because people are junior scholars are trying to get promotion and tenure, instead of just coming up with a label like we call people who are involved in our grant who are not PI or co-PI, research associates. So then they could say, I'm a research associate on this grant, and the same thing, let's say, for a doc student. So think about how to use whatever labels are at your university that can help promote those folks, and that way they can feel like they're investing time in your grant, and that the time that they're investing is going to pay off in terms of their tenure and promotion. So I think that's also very important.
Yeah, and that's, again, it's like you said, a great lead into question 5.
Right.
So we're going to close up in terms of our pre-designed questions, right? And then later have time for other questions and answers. But our last question is, do you have any additional advice or recommendations for how junior scholars might go about seeking their first grant?
Well, I'm supposed to respond to that one. This is Socorro. And I think with everything that you've talked about, I think number 1, as a junior faculty member, cultivate those partnerships. Mandy talked about the importance of cultivating the partnerships, because as you start pulling together these proposals, if you've cultivated that partnership, you're going to be able to pick up the phone and say, I need a letter, and it's going to come because the partnership is there, the trust is there, the relationship is there. As I said earlier, my huge challenge and learning curve was budget. I was so eager to provide scholarships and recruit and retain future teachers of color that I really sold myself short in budget for the types of things that the activities that I promised. And I also overpromised the activities that we were going to do. So that first project that I had was very, very difficult because of that. Have very clear ideas of where the intersection of your values, your research, and what you hope to collaborate towards. And so start thinking about that very early on, because it's not about just seeking out that external funding just to have the money. It's about something that feeds your soul, because I think everyone would agree that when we have external funding, it's a lot of work, and it has to be something that we're committed and passionate about, not just to put it on our vita. And I know that that's part of it also, but really it does add another layer for throughout our career. The other thing that I would say is reach out, reach out, reach out, and don't be afraid to ask questions. Not everyone in the academy is giving, but I can tell you that in our community, people are there to share proposals. People are there to give you half an hour to hold a conversation with them about, guide you. And so do not be afraid to reach out within your community for people who have been successful. And I think I would just end with, don't overpromise. Don't overpromise. Don't overpromise. So, and I know my colleagues also have a lot to share with that. So I'll mute.
I think as a junior scholar, what was really difficult for me to learn was how to talk about what I wanted to do, what I wanted to get funding for, in a way that other people could really understand and see the value in. So I would say something to the research department at my university: I'm interested in the biliteracy development of adolescent emergent bilinguals. And some of those very well educated people didn't know what I meant by that, because I was using language that we understand in our world. So working with people across campus and applying for that internal funding where people from different departments are going to evaluate, that was really beneficial for me to learn how to talk or write about what I wanted to do, so everyone besides just people in our field could see the importance of it. So learning how to write and tell others from different audiences about what we want to do, I think, is really important. So apply for everything you can at your university, and I think you'll get some feedback to help you move forward.
And this goes into one of the questions, a couple of questions that are there in the additional questions. The writing a grant is very different than writing for a scholarly article. So it's a different genre. And so looking at, like Socorro mentioned, looking at other proposals and how they're written. And so each, there's little different nuances, let's say, between NSF and the U.S. Department of Ed. So you do need to look at the way a grant is written. And sometimes it may not match our research lens. So answer the questions or look at the sections and answer in those ways. So it's a different genre. Some of you were asking about qualitative research. And so how do you engage in the qualitative research? So this is where you bring in someone else. If you're a mostly qualitative researcher, you bring in a colleague who's a quantitative, or someone else who's a quantitative person, so that you can pose those quantitative questions, and then it ends up being like a mixed method study, because most of the grants are going to be quantitative. They're not going to be qualitative driven. I don't think I've seen anyone where the qualitative aspect is on its own valued, and maybe someone else has found one, but to my long experience with grants, I haven't yet to do. So that's how you bring in and you build a team where you can look at the problem or the question that you have from a qualitative lens, but you bring in that quantitative researcher as well to help you secure that grant.
To that end, I sometimes seek out individuals who are out in the field to give the finished proposal a quick read. There's not always time for that, but when there is, when you can pre-plan, even if it's just a skim, because you become so involved in the writing that sometimes you miss different components that are asked for. So I've done that a whole lot in the past when there was time.
I want to emphasize the point that Belinda made about the genre of writing grants, because you will receive RFPs that go a little bit against the grain, your style, your thinking, your methodology, your values and belief. But if you want to secure that grant, you need to read the RFP carefully, and use the same language and the same framework to then develop the activities you want to do. But they have to fit within the scope of the granting agency and the RFP. And then the other thing is apply, apply, apply. I think Socorro mentioned that.
Mhm.
As a junior faculty, I applied to many grants and didn't get them. And part of the problem is I applied for big grants and I didn't have a senior faculty with me, so I was not going to be able to get those by myself. If I would have had a co-PI, maybe that would have helped. And the other thing, as a junior faculty, I applied to many and didn't get them, but every time I learn a little bit. And the way I learned it was by reading the feedback. At first, like when you get a paper rejected, you say, oh, they don't understand. Those people are in a different field. They come from another perspective. The same thing when you read your feedback from the granting agency or other colleagues or grant writers. You know, read it, try to put the differences apart and aside, and then listen to what they are saying, because they're seeing things that you didn't. So, you know, keep applying, don't give up. After a while, there's some rhythm to applying to grants. Not that I'm getting them all funded, but I think we figure out some things how to be successful.
I think the other recommendation that I would make, and that's just something that I've done also, is, you know, when you're trying to mentor others to write, you know, and working with others, that they do, you know, it does get to a point, and at least in my point, I will help review the grants as they're writing them and whatever, giving them advice, but allow others to take ownership, especially junior scholars, so that they can have more input or skin in the game. And so that way you're building their skills, but at the same time you're still, especially if you have, you know, you built a center, you want that in order for the center to succeed is for these grants then to be funded. And so building the skills of others, once you feel like, okay, I got the rhythm, I understand, then you can become that expert guide for others, and building the capacity of others so that your center, if that's what you're building, is continues to thrive. Because centers can come and go. Socorro, you've had your center for over 20 years. We've had our center over 15 years. I can't even count. So I have to go back to whenever I was first funded. So building the capacity of those around you who are your team members, so they can start generating those funds and allowing them to be the PIs, and always encouraging them to engage in that research. Because in addition to, you know, the newspaper articles or the media, is having also demonstrating to potential partners, here's the scholarship, here's where I have published, and these are the outcomes, whether they're immediate or long term.
Any others? What about, can you talk a little bit about the timeline, or maybe some strategies for keeping in mind the timeline of some of these grants?
The grants, I'm gonna talk about this because then I got to go to my other meeting. I apologize, but thank you for everybody for joining us, and everybody who is on the panel. I think it's been a wonderful experience. Is that sometimes the grants are announced, and sometimes they're a quick turnaround, and so perhaps at that point, you know, you may reach out to others, but it may not be the right timing. So but it allows you to start thinking about the kinds of priorities that the grant has requiring or needing, and so it allows you to start thinking about it. Because again, like Gisela said, what you want to do has to fit into what the RFP is asking for. Mm-hmm. And so you have to think about, how would this fit into? So there's always a section of in that's evaluation, depending on the grant, evaluation. And so in working with your evaluator, this is where you built in also the kinds of questions that you want to ask. So making sure you are connecting to that evaluator, but also making sure that you're connecting the pieces. So it's like you want to make sure you understand an RFP, attend any sessions that talk or speak about getting grants, because there's an art to this, and it's a lot of work. But once you get the flow, then you're successful. Does it mean that you'll get it every time, even when you're an experienced person in terms of getting grants? No, you sometimes get rejected again, just like you get rejected in articles, even you're an experienced or researcher. So be ready for rejection, but also pushing forward. Don't give up.
Also, as far as timeline for some smaller grants from professional organizations, you can see that if they accept these grants every year at a certain time, or it might be odd number of years or even number of years, and you can then plan that, okay, at this time, I'm probably going to apply for this grant. And I would think at least a year beforehand, the partnerships you might want to develop beforehand.
Yeah, and again, thank you again. I know some of the panelists have to leave early, so we want to be mindful of their time, and we're so grateful for your time. I'm seeing some questions in the chat that I wanted to sort of share, and also, you know, again, if you have any add-ons or anything that you want to share with the group. Some of the participants are asking if they are able to contact the panelists with further questions, or if there's any contact information we have. And they're also asking about specific funders that are more open or maybe specific to bilingual education research.
I want to underscore one thing. Most universities now have people within the university that are dedicated to disseminate grant information. And sometimes you haven't contacted them, or you are new, and so you're not getting that information. Make sure you contact any person from the dean's office, or your college, or the research office, however your university has it organized, that you are interested in getting grants. Give your specific areas, be broad, because sometimes you can just come from this angle or that angle to a proposal. And then in that way, you have someone doing the research for you, finding out what opportunities are there for you, because sometimes we think about, well, the big agencies, but there are many other opportunities out there. So one advice, contact your research grants person at your university or college.
I think that's great advice, because oftentimes the State Department has small grants, and so does the university. I also want to say that's the place to start, because you learn a whole lot, but don't limit yourself also, especially if you can get a partnership and get individuals to come together to plan that. There's all sorts of monies out there if you have a good idea, and if you can present it in a way that's cogent and persuasive. So it's either partnering with someone or really reflecting on what it is that you hope to accomplish, and then going out and seeking. I don't have them in front of me, but there's also some websites that you can register for that send you something every week about what's out there. I can send those out later.
That'd be great. Yeah, thank you for volunteering to do that. A couple of folks were wondering if you all had suggestions for grants that would be a good place to start for junior scholars. Where would be a good place for us to start looking?
I think first, make sure you take advantage of everything you have within your university to get that experience. And next, you might look at the professional organizations you're already involved in, because you probably will have a good understanding of just the pulse of the organization and what their core beliefs are. And from there, certainly your State Department, and then the federal grants. But you can look across them, but don't discount the smaller grants that are either internally in your university or from smaller organizations.
There's a question that asks, should we start with internal grants or go big NSF grants? As a junior faculty, chances are, as a PI of a big grant, it won't fly because they look carefully at the experience, both in terms of administrating and leading, because you have to lead a group of people working, particularly when it's a $1 million, $2 million grant. So as a junior faculty, partner with someone, but if you can't start that way, follow Mandy's advice about starting with the internal grants. Many institutions, at WSU, for example, when you get a small grant, they are already asking you what big institution you're going to apply for. So it's making you think about the next step and the next funding. And with that, I will have to excuse myself because I also have another meeting. But thank you so much.
So I just want to then maybe this is a great transition time for just a huge moment of gratitude for your time, panelists, for sharing your insight and wisdom. We are truly, truly so grateful. Thank you for taking the time to share with us.
Thank you.
Then, if those of you that had questions that we didn't get to address today, or if you have questions for the panelists, we have a slide here in just a second that will show you how you can address those questions and how you can funnel those through, and we will do our best to help answer those questions. And then I just want to give some space for a couple of quick announcements from the SIG. So the first one is thinking about our upcoming winter webinar. We are going to be looking specifically at starting small. So how do we do that? For junior scholars, how do we start small? Because as our panelists so graciously noted for us, it's really not feasible for us to be funded as junior scholars. We've also had some great feedback from our mentor talking about creating a publication trail of record and how important that is. So when we are looking at our winter webinar, we'll be talking about tangible things that we can do to help create a record for ourselves and how to address getting funding and building this kind of track record of leading and how to do that. Thank you for also bringing that up, Mandy, and how you were talking about grants we can be specifically thinking about. Then we also want to just put forward our call for mentors and mentees will be coming for our mentoring session at AERA in 2020. We're looking so forward. We're hoping everyone intends to attend. And that call for mentors will be coming out soon. And then the call for mentees will be coming a little bit more into the winter. So be on the lookout for those things coming your way. And then just lastly, and again, a huge thank you. Everyone's plates are so full, and just for the generosity of the time of our panelists today and for all of you for taking the time to attend. We are grateful for this collaborative community and the Bilingual Research SIG at AERA. So please, if you have questions, feel free to address them through email or give me a quick phone call, and then we will funnel those questions for you to the best of our ability. And we hope to further address anything that you need or questions you may have at our winter webinar. We look forward to seeing you then. Thanks, everybody. Be well.
Thank you. I enjoyed it very much.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you, Socorro. Thank you.
Thank you. And then some of the participants are wondering about the PowerPoint slides, if they're able to access it.
We are recording it and it will be posted. That won't be directly through us, but it'll be through the folks in our SIG who do that. Yep.
Okay.
So it will come in one of the announcements, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, I think that's the best way.
Mm-hmm. Okay, be well. Take good care, everyone.
Bye.
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 Okay, team. Claudia, do you want to stop the recording?
Yes.